Hello, everyone, and welcome to 3 Words, a bite-sized podcast about the simple and yet strategic choices that we all can make in order to become the best versions of ourselves. My name is Dr. Michael Brown, and I am the host of 3 Words, and I am so pleased to be here with my friend, socially distanced, of course, during this global pandemic, but my dear friend, Dan Costello. And Dan, this is, I think, the 3rd time that we've been together on a podcast, and can I just say to you, I've missed you. Not just on this podcast, but in general, because you have not been as accessible and as available as you once were. And we'll talk more about that. But first, would you be so kind to share with us our 3 words for today?
Yeah. Today's 3 words are sit in silence.
Sit in silence. Now, obviously, we are dear friends, and so I am very aware of what these past 6 months have meant for you and have looked like for you. And I think the reality is you didn't choose silence. Silence chose you. Would you fill us in and fill in our listeners and podcast viewers what these past 6 months have looked like for you?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to talk about difficult things because, everyone's going through a difficult time in a global pandemic. And everyone's story is different, of course, but for me, it looked a little bit different. I remember I was driving home on a Friday. It was in March, and I was just on a work trip in Indiana for the past 3 days. And I was listening to the news, and it was right when COVID, I think it was like March 10th or something like that. And it was just when COVID was starting to become a thing in the United States. And I was just thinking, man, this is going to get crazy. And when I got home, that's when our work sent out an email that said, hey, we're going to be working from home for the next foreseeable future. And that's when COVID became real for us at my house, at least. And I have three little ones at home, and I have a newborn at home. She was at that point only 2 months. Her name's Claire. So cute. But so I got home, and then all of a sudden we're working from home. And it was within that time frame, I would say about 5 days later, I started having some sinus congestion, and it turned into a couple days later, I had some shortness of breath. And it was one of those things where you're like, okay, this is weird. This is all in my head. The news says the 3 things are sinus congestion, or the 3 things are, shortness of breath, and a fever and, fatigue. And I'm like, well, I have shortness of breath. I don't have a fever. But then, of course, that night I started having a low-grade fever. And so the shortness of breath turned into some chest tightness and difficulty breathing. I was out of breath from going up the stairs. And that's when I started to talk to a doctor and start to figure things out. And honestly, it was the most scary thing when you're in the middle of a world pandemic and you have 3 little kids and you just were told that you have to stay in your house forever. Mike DeWine, our governor, put out a stay-at-home order. And so we're like, is this really happening? Like, do I have COVID in the middle of a COVID pandemic? And it was a crazy experience overall. And, in totality, I don't want to go into every single detail unless you want to ask me about it. But, in totality, it was about 100 days before I felt fully, back to somewhat normal again. And I can list out so many different symptoms that I had. I did not actually test positive for COVID, which is another confusing thing of that.
It seems like several folks that have had COVID did not test positive or didn't even have the antibodies.
Yeah. And honestly, that's been a hard thing for me just to deal with is not being able to name it. When you're sick for 100 days, and I'm talking like extreme fatigue, like my wife would just look at me and she'd just be like, you need to just go upstairs. Cause I'm like looking off into a distance.
Well, sick. And you ended up going to the ER a couple of times and you had heart issues and you had breathing challenges. And even as we were talking, on occasion when you were going through all of that, even your entire D&B coaching team, because we are a family, just feeling like, how can we help? That's just helplessness, right?
And I've never felt so alone, yet there's with so many people looking out for me. I can't tell you how many people were texting me, calling me, sending us meals. People that I haven't talked to in a long time were even, reaching out and trying to help us out because, my wife is at home taking care of 3 kids and she can't go anywhere, can't see anybody. And of course, when the husband's sick, no one wants to come over to our house, so we don't have any people to see. And, it was just a really stressful time.
And even as you were walking through this and we were talking on a regular basis, you were seeing tremendous positive things begin to happen inside of you. Obviously, you were afraid and there was fear and there was confusion and so forth. But even now, walking through some of those things, because we talk a lot about in D&B coaching, that there's always pain, and with pain comes possibility. Mm-hmm. And so there's tremendous possibilities. And even this topic of sitting in silence, you spend a lot of time sitting in silence.
Yeah.
And a lot of time quarantined to your room and trying to protect your wife and your 3 young children. And what was going on during that time? And obviously so much silence.
Yeah.
And you even begin to journal, and some different things begin to happen for a very high caliber. And I know you well, fast paced entrepreneur. I mean, you are rising in the executive corporate world at super fast rates at a very young age. And here you are.
Stop.
Immobilized.
Stop. You just have to
sitting in silence.
Yeah. And I'm glad you asked, because honestly, that was really hard at first. And when you're feeling not just in silence, but you're feeling ill on top of it, you're kind of like incapable of doing the things that you've typically done before. And I remember multiple times just sitting up in my room, and mostly because I'm having trouble breathing. So I would have to go up to my room and like do breathing exercises so that I could get myself back on track and be like, am I going to the ER tonight? Am I not going to the ER tonight?
Wow.
But it was in those times that I finally realized that I'm like, okay, all the other outside noise that's in my life, and not that it's noise, but all the other things that are distracting me from, my life right now is, my kids, my job, everything. It's at that point I had to obviously step away from all those things and unfortunately focus on my health. Right. But in that time, it was good for me to realize just to kind of like detox from the constant go, 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 go. And I think sitting in silence has helped me to learn, just reflecting on the situation and journaling, that maybe I've made my health an idol to some extent. And that's kind of a weird thing to say, because we don't think of our health as being something that we could, make an idol in our lives, or something that we, essentially worship in our lives. But I was realizing that every day I was thinking about, well, how do I feel today? Am I a little bit better? Am I, I'm taking a log of how I'm feeling. But I was realizing that, our health is such a gift.
Yeah.
And at that point, I have so much more gratitude for what it means to be a healthy person. And, for the folks who are out there who are dealing with, illnesses that they've been dealing with for years and years and years. Not that I can even relate to that to some extent, but just a tiny bit, have compassion on people like that are going through that. And in silence is what gave me that thought process, Yeah.
So your empathy meter went up as you were sitting in 100%. Silence, and you were beginning to grow in a lot of different ways. You were talking about spiritual growth and your relationship with God, and just even obviously gratitude and appreciation. There was all these things happening to the point now where you would actually say that sitting in silence is a good thing.
Yeah.
And one of the first things you were mentioning to me in just our conversation, off camera, is to remove distractions. And you kind of went through these kind of 3 steps to sitting in silence. And would you be willing to share that with our listeners and our viewers, please?
Yeah. I think the first thing was like you said, remove distractions, remove outside noise and things that are going on. Obviously, I had to unfortunately stop looking at all the COVID cases that were popping up at that time, because it was just like, and then, okay, what's the mortality rate? And now, okay, do I have COVID? I had to stop. I had to remove all those distractions. And that, allowed me to be able to reflect and think about what's going on in my life. So like I was saying to you earlier, is that, remove distractions, reflect on yourself and, who you are. And then lastly is just to actually just rest, recharge, relax. That's what sitting in silence was for me. I think that,
so removing distractions, reflecting upon your life and who you're becoming and all the deeper things of you.
Right.
And then just recharging and resting in that time.
Like resting is just like actually just sitting down and resting. I think we all have that time now, unfortunately, whether we like to admit it or not. Some people are more busy, some people are less busy, but honestly, just resting means resting. Like just don't do anything. Don't think. I mean, I even challenge myself on my drive here to sit in silence. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be talking about sitting in silence. Can I sit in silence? And it just feels funny for some that we can't actually just let there be quiet in our lives.
And interestingly enough, what we're going to do right now, if you'd be willing to do this with me, Dan, is for just 60 seconds as a part of this podcast. Like obviously if you're watching on YouTube, it's just going to be still. And if you're listening in your car or your vehicle or you're listening to your podcast, it's going to be silent for just 60 seconds. Now, my producer said to me, what most people are going to do is hit fast forward twice, 30 seconds and 30 seconds. I'm going to encourage you not to do that. To literally for 60 seconds, sit with Dan and I, beginning now. Time's up. Now, I'm guessing for some of us, that was exhilarating. We needed 60 seconds just to, I actually really enjoyed it.
It was relaxing.
For others of us, it probably was excruciating because it's like, this is weird. It's too long, right? Yeah. 60 seconds.
Well, the funny thing about it is that actually while we were doing that, I was thinking, okay, what are we talking about next? What's the next thing that we want to talk about? And I'm like, wait, this is not sitting in silence. Like, let your mind just be at ease. And honestly, even in that moment of silence, you kind of think about things that are less about the now and the immediate, and you start thinking about things about maybe in the past or things that are happening in the future, which potentially could change the way that you live your life.
Our lives, generally speaking, are so noisy. Mm-hmm. There's so much there, always happening. And so to be able to sit in silence, it's not going to happen spontaneously. It's going to happen as a result of an intentional, proactive choice, which is going to be hard because for me particularly, there's so much to do. There's the tyranny of the urgent. And if I can be honest, it's sometimes scary to be alone with my thoughts. Mm-hmm. Because when I sit for 60 seconds or even 6 minutes, if I were to do that, that would be amazingly long, right? What kind of things are going to come into my mind? Because it's probably not going to be just the things I need to do. It's going to be maybe who I'm becoming, struggles I'm dealing with, scars, storms that maybe are in my life, just those hard things, contradictions within my life. And there's just those kinds of things.
Or even what I think about typically is, who have I neglected in my life? What relationships have I not really invested in? And I know that's not typically what you would, bring up in a topic about sitting in silence. But when my mind is reflecting on what's going on in my life, it's always about relationships.
Doing an inventory of my life, whatever discipline we can incorporate, is really, really powerful. So my friend, as we wrap up this conversation, and it's good to have you back. It's good to have the healthy Dan who has been through a storm.
Yes.
And has come from the other side, able to really value this very simple discipline. In fact, I would encourage all of our listeners and viewers to even invest maybe 5 minutes a day and just see what happens in your life as you become the better version of you. If you're willing to experiment with the notion of sitting in silence. For life coaching, consulting services, or to hire a keynote speaker, please visit dmbcoaching.com.